Hi, in this week's video, I'm going to be comparing these two siblings, the humble Volkswagen e-Golf, a compliance car really, and a car that had a lot of fuss made about it when it first came out, the Volkswagen ID.3, now also available extensively secondhand. So which one is right for you? Well, we've had thousands of miles driving our two e-Golfs and our three ID.3s over the last few years. So I'm going to give you a comparison of both in a way that perhaps you haven't heard before, and I'll help you decide which car is the right one for you. And we actually upgraded our e-Golf to an ID.3. We've since moved that car on, and I'll also tell you what we're driving now. Let's get cracking. So the first category is charging speeds. Now I'm in the UK where most houses have single phase electricity. So that means there's basically one supply of electricity coming into the whole house. And that means with a home charger, both cars will take 7 kilowatts of electricity, meaning they'll charge at around 28 to 30 miles an hour when you plug them in. So in most use cases, this would be a tie. However, if you have a house with 3-phase electricity, as in 3 electrics coming in, or you might be charging in a more commercial setting at work or in a factory, for instance, then some of those buildings will have 3-phase electricity, where the ID.3 will actually charge a bit quicker. So both cars on a single phase can take 7 kilowatts of charge. However, on a 3-phase connection, the ID.3 can take up to 11. So instead of charging at about 28 to 30 miles an hour, in those scenarios, you will get up to about 45 miles an hour of range added each hour. But most places aren't 3-phase, so it might not make that much of a difference to you. The biggest difference comes if you're out on the road charging. So if you put the ID.3 and the e-Golf on a 100 kilowatt charger, so that's the speed the electricity can go into the car, then the ID.3 can take up to that full 100 kilowatts of charge. However, the Volkswagen e-Golf is quite a bit behind at less than half. That can only take 40 kilowatts of charge. So that means if we're on a long journey in the e-Golf, when we go beyond its normal range, we might be stopping for 30 to 40 minutes just to top it up, whereas with the ID.3, that might be sort of 20 minutes. We kind of normally schedule charging with kind of refreshment breaks or meal stops, so it doesn't make a huge difference for us. But if you are charging a lot on rapid chargers, then the ID.3 will certainly charge up to 2.5 times quicker than the e-Golf will. However, both cars can go further than my bladder, so it's never been a problem for us. And with our e-Golf and our ID.3s, I mean, in excess of 95% of the charging is done at home on a 7 kilowatt wall box anyway. The next category is driving experience. So these are both kind of like medium-sized cars in the UK. If you live in the US, they might be small cars to you there. But both of them feel really planted at motorway speed. So if you're taking these on long journeys at 60, 70 miles an hour for a prolonged period of time, then they're both exceptionally comfortable. Because of their size, I kind of was expecting them to be okay at motorway speeds. However, when we've taken both cars on long journeys, they've always surprised me at how well they handle motorway journeys. If you drive a lot on A and B roads, say at 40 to 60 miles an hour, then again, both cars are excellent. The e-Golf does start to edge things though in the twisties. So when it comes to cornering and having a little bit more fun with your drive, at these speeds, 40 to 60 miles an hour, the e-Golf is much more of a fun place to be than the ID.3. However, both are good. And when you take these cars around the town or in cities, the e-Golf really shines compared to the ID.3. So the ID.3 is a heavier car, and Volkswagen haven't done a great job of hiding that extra weight at lower speeds. It can feel really heavy, and the steering dynamic, it does feel a little bit like, you know, city driving, like it's been designed by committee. All of the fun has been kind of engineered out of lower speed driving, in my opinion, with the ID.3. The e-Golf is essentially a compliance car. It's not a platform as many cars are now, where they're designed for petrol, diesel, hybrid and electric. This was a petrol and a diesel car, and through whatever compliance had to go through, they took an engine out and put an electric drivetrain in. And this gives it some quirks, but also makes it incredibly fun to drive at lower speeds. So if you're driving around town, it's very nippy, it's very perky, it really wants to go, which is kind of the opposite of the ID.3 in many ways. And it's a bit like a Labrador. It just seems to be always happy to see you. And if you're taking it out around the town, you're always guaranteed to put a smile on your face. If you're a fan of one pedal type braking, so by that I mean you take your foot off the accelerator and the car starts to slow down quite rapidly, then the e-Golf has, well, far superior regenerative braking feel than the ID.3. The ID.3 isn't bad, it's all right. It's just that the e-Golf is better. If range is important to you, then it's a hands down win for the ID.3. The most popular ID.3, it comes in 3 battery sizes, 45, 58, and I think 75 or 77 kilowatt hours of battery size. I think the most popular is the 58. Certainly the 3 that we had were all 58 kilowatt hour batteries. And that does give it a reasonable range compared to the Volkswagen e-Golf. The usable battery in the e-Golf is somewhere around 33 or 34 kilowatt hours, so coming on for half the size. In winter, the e-Golf would be down to, and by winter I mean like there's snow on the ground, you have to defrost your car, like proper winter, -0 degrees Celsius, then the e-Golf's range would be down to typically just under 100 miles, so maybe 95 miles of range, whereas the ID.3 on a really cold day, we found would still do about 165 to 170 miles, so quite a bit further. In summer, so perfect kind of EV weather, not much wind, about 20, 25 degrees like it is today, then the e-Golf would get up to 140 miles of range, where the ID.3 would hit 220 miles of range. And if you think about spring and autumn, so similar temperatures really, the e-Golf would be about 110 to 120, whereas the ID.3 would be a solid 200 miles of range. And these are our real world experiences. On a 200-mile round trip to see my dad, I managed to hit the 0 miles club of range for the first time ever after 4 years of driving an EV. I mean, it was a little bit hairy. I was kind of acting cool about it at the time, but was a little bit worried. So I hit that 0 miles club in the ID.3 at exactly 200 miles. This video isn't sponsored. However, I would like to take a moment before I tell you more about these two cars to talk about this, my Whoop 4.0. If you watch my videos, you've seen that I wear this a lot. Well, I wear it every day. And this goes beyond being just a fitness tracker. It's also a really good health coach. The Whoop 4.0 helps me get my daily strain or get my daily activities just right. It also helps me manage my sleep so that I get the right amount of sleep that I need compared to the exertion I've made, which leads to me feeling, in the most part, nearly every day, very well recovered. It also measures my heart rate variability, which essentially is your get up and go. And as you can see, since using the Whoop, month on month, my get up and go, or HRV, has improved every single month, and I genuinely feel like it has as well. If you think this might be good for you, I'll put a link in the description so you can get a free Whoop and also have your first month subscription on me, and it also helps support the channel. So thank you very much. Back to EV Steve. Next thing I want to talk about is the controls of the car. So the Volkswagen e-Golf just looks like a normal Golf, and the controls are very traditional. So if you've driven a traditional car, you'll get into an e-Golf and it will look very much like any car that you've driven. And it's the same model as the Mark 7 Golf, the Mark 7.5 Golf actually. So it's not the latest model Golf, which is the Mark 8, it's the Mark 7.5. The controls are basic, but they're very familiar to you, and you've got Apple CarPlay and Android Auto available by plug-in. In addition to that, it's a very well spec'd car. For example, even the base models have an electrically defrosted electric heating in the front windscreen, so on a cold day you can just defrost your car at a press of a button. The ID.3, if you watched ID.3 videos, you know what I'm going to say. The ID.3 controls are a little bit of a mess. So that you've got a lot of these haptic buttons which just annoy the hell out of you, and when you're steering you can accidentally like brush them and they can go off. You can't see the heating controls in the dark because it's not illuminated, and the software, the 3 ID.3s we had were on software 2, so up to about 2.3 or 2.4 I think. It's just shocking. I mean, it's hard to believe. And I hear that the person that developed the software no longer works at Volkswagen, but it's hard to believe that they could release a car with such bad software. However, I have spent some time with an ID.5, which has version 3 software, and it's like light years ahead of version 2. So I think, but don't know, that if you're buying a second-hand ID.3, then you may be able to, at some point, upgrade that to version 3 software, and that will help a lot with what's going on. But the controls in an ID.3 are disappointing. And it also cost us a lot more to charge this car. So we have an off-peak tariff with Octopus Energy. So that means between 12:30 AM and 4:30 AM, we get really cheap electricity. So less than a third of the price that we pay outside of that time. So we then charge both of our cars, our Tesla and our e-Golf, during that period. And it means that when we drive about 1,000 miles of home charge, like if we're charging at home and we use that to drive 1,000 miles over the course of a month, it probably costs less than £20 per 1,000 miles driven. However, with the ID.3, you could program the car to charge in this window, but it just do what it wanted. So I would probably say it only charged in this window, even though it was programmed to charge in this window, 25% of the time. So the other times it would just charge when it wanted, and that electricity would be 3 times the cost. So in short, it cost us about 3 times the cost to run the ID.3 as it did the e-Golf, even though we were charging from the same place. It's just so frustrating. When it comes to spec, it's another win for the e-Golfs. So I've mentioned that they've got a heated front windscreen, they've also got heated mirrors, they've also got things like adaptive cruise control as standard. I think Volkswagen did a really good job with the ID.3, where I'm not sure how well they thought it was going to do, so they just put a lot of kit on it as standard. We've got one with a reversing camera as well, which I would recommend if you're going to get an ID.3 because it does add more to the experience. But overall, we're really happy with the specification of this car. At least 2 of the ID.3s we had didn't even have speakers in the back, which was crazy. But listening to music thinking, this just doesn't sound as good as I wanted it to. And then where the rear speakers are, where the little holes are, shine a torch in, nothing. They hadn't even put rear speakers on the back on some specs of that car. And all of those specs on that car, you can't even control the rear windows up and down easily from the front. You have to press a button to change the window controls you've got to rear. So it does the rear, press the button to change it back to do the front. So there's 3 buttons there, one that switches between front and back and 2 controls, as opposed to 4 buttons if they'd have just kind of put the controls in for both of them. I don't really get it. Who is each car for? With the ID.3, I would say if you want the security of extra range and you do a lot of longer journeys in excess of 100 miles in a day, for instance, and you charge away from home, then the ID.3 is a really good first EV. It's also got a slightly higher driving position, which if you want a higher driving position, then you will like it. And if you've got mobility issues, or like me, you're just getting a little bit middle-aged, it is easier to get in and out of. And the visibility is better when you're driving as well. And despite being marginally smaller in all dimensions externally, apart from height obviously, than the e-Golf, it's actually bigger inside. So Volkswagen have said that the ID.3 is smaller than a Golf, but has more internal space than a Passat, the next car up. And I would agree with them. They've done a really good job of making good space in that cabin. I think the e-Golf will really suit drivers who don't travel more than 100 miles a day, or want something that looks a lot more traditional than some EVs, including the ID.3, I guess, that are out there. Because it just looks like a normal Golf, you'll also avoid middle-aged men coming up to you in car parks, asking you how far will it go, and telling you why an EV won't work for them, even though you don't care, but you're too polite to say, look, get lost, mate, and you stand there listening to them. Doesn't happen with the e-Golf. The feedback from the road is also much better. So we recently had a puncture in our e-Golf, and you could tell straight away they had a puncture, but I kind of had to like inflate it with those cans of Holt's tyre weld. It was quite a big hole, so it took 2 big cans to get the tyre up and running. And on the 20-mile journey to get it fixed, I could tell exactly how that tyre was doing just through how good the feedback is through the steering wheel when you drive the e-Golf. If you want something that's fun to drive, then an e-Golf, if I look at round town driving, and having a laugh, I've owned 3 Teslas and an S, a 3, and just bought a Y. The e-Golf puts a bigger smile on my face than the Teslas do. I think that just says everything. It's also a lot nippier than the ID.3, as I've mentioned, and the gear change isn't up here like on the ID.3, which I never really got used to. It's actually down here, more like a traditional car is. At the start of this video, I said I'd say what we bought after we sold our ID.3. We had an e-Golf upgraded to an ID.3. That lasted 5 months, the last one that we had. The first one was on a 2-week trial, and the other one I'd actually hired for a month when I was between cars. So the ID.3 went, my wife really didn't want to drive it anymore, and you probably guessed, we've got another e-Golf. And that's the first time ever that we've kind of gone from one model of car to the newer model of car, and then decided to go backwards, which is testament to how good the e-Golf is as a car, and also a reflection of how the ID.3 isn't quite as good as everyone said it was. And when we sold our ID.3 with 20,000 miles on the clock, we were able to pick up a very lightly used e-Golf with only 6,000 miles on the clock, and also pocket £6,000 in cash, which was the difference between the two. So we were really pleased. And that's it. I think you'll be happy with either car. Our preference, especially as the e-Golf is a second car, so we don't do really long journeys in it, and we charge it at home, I would say not hands down, by a country mile, the e-Golf is a lot more fun to live with than an ID.3. However, I think the ID.3 is very good as well. I'll put some videos here so you can see my review of both of these cars, and until next time, see you soon.